Captain's Log, January 26, 2016. Yeah, talking about Sonic the Hedgehog again, and this is probably not the first thing folks would have figured that I would do a Captain's Log on, since I haven't done one in a few days. Big things that have happened lately that I haven't talked about yet. The X-Files premiere, just watched it, and I will say right now, I was really kind of floored by it and really enjoyed it. It has the potential to have numerous problems by the time we get to the end of the sixth episode miniseries. We'll see what ends up happening with it, but boy, was that dense 45 minutes. I was really excited about it. Just the tone and just how ambitious they're being with the mythology and how authentic it is to the tone and the way that show was always made. I'm really excited about it, and we'll talk about it on Primetime Crisis, so I didn't want to do a whole review or discussion in a Captain's Log, but I do want to mention that I just want to say that I did really like it, and if you've not watched it again, or you're thinking, well, I saw a few episodes of X-Files, I've got some friends like this that are like, it had such a long run, it seems like I couldn't possibly jump in. Very easy to jump in. They did a really good job, I think, of catching you up to speed on what you need to know, and without giving anything away, doing a really good job of making nothing that happened before all that important, or maybe it will be, but you know, enough of it is there and we're told about that you still don't have to have seen that series, but it is either going to be make it even more convoluted than it ever was before, or fix a lot of problems I had with that show. And Duchovny and Anderson are tearing it up. It was a really good time. Anyway, I also, the DC Comics Rebirth thing has been in such rumor mill territory. We have no idea what it is really. There was a website that reported that it was a straight up reboot and relaunch, and nobody really knows for sure what exactly it's going to be. So Dan and I are going to tackle that in a GNN this week, talking about just exploring where DC is right now and what we think they probably should be doing in order to fix the big financial woes they've been under and to get people excited about their brand again. So we will be chatting about that a little bit later this week. So I'm going to talk about something very small, or at least, in the grand scheme of things going on in the news right now. This is much more in the territory of radical fan theory people have had for years that may be turning out to be more true than anybody could possibly have anticipated. I read this wonderful article today in the Huffington Post by Todd Van Luling, who... This is a 13-page article. It's very extensive, a lot of research, and really thorough. And this is a guy giving us a lot of information, but also very much writing from the heart. A guy who loves video games, loves Sonic the Hedgehog, has been fascinated by this fan theory for years, and the writing is just really, really good. Weird to review an article, but it's worth reading somewhat just for how well-written an article it is, and how absolutely fascinating this is. I think really, no matter who you are, whether you're a video game player or a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, or a fan of Michael Jackson, or just someone that's interested in pop culture history that was buried and that nobody knows about, or that may or may not be true. It's a fascinating, almost conspiracy, if it really is true, and it's one of those we'll never fully totally know, but it's kind of George Reeves in that way. Not that it's anything like that big of a deal. It's not a crime that we're uncovering. But basically, the theory has been for a lot of years, because of melodies that seem really reminiscent to Michael Jackson's work, especially work that he had done right around then and right after it, with the album that he put out just after Sonic 3 released, that Michael Jackson wrote the soundtrack for Sonic 3, which sounds, when you first hear it, like the most bizarre, out there thing ever. But there's a whole lot of evidence that he was not only involved in the soundtrack, but that he was spearheading it and very heavily involved and came up with the majority of the melodies of the game. This is so interesting to me. I'm not going to get real in depth with this. I just wanted to bring this article to your attention, and if you didn't hear about it already, and link it and try to get folks to read it, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Like I said, it's a really just intriguing article that kept me reading and kept me engaged, and I was really interested in what I was reading. The big thing this got me wanting to do is to go back and find out everything there is to know about the original Sonic games, because as Van Luling points out, those games were always, in various ways, kind of mired in mystery, and like a lot of big, I mean, Mario has a little bit of this too, like a lot of big 8 and 16-bit side-scrollers, there are all kinds of Easter eggs, both in things you can do in the game and finding things, but also in just how exactly they were put together, because people didn't pay nearly as much attention, of course, and a lot of people paid no attention to who was involved in creating these games and looking at the credits. And of course, you had to play in games back then, especially all the way to the end, to find out who even was working on the game and involved in it at all, and who of us actually sat through the credits and paid any attention at the time. And these days, people want to know how everything is put together, and we pay a lot more attention to directors and composers and even and writers and a lot of people involved. I mean, like a lot of people now can even tell you who edited movies. That's the thing nobody talked about when I was a kid, and that is of course very true for video games now too. And video games are taken by a lot of people as seriously as movies, and people want to know the ins and outs of how they're put together. And there was a book, and I can't remember what it's called. Maybe it was just generically the history of Sonic the Hedgehog. I forget. But this very large kind of coffee table sized book that came out somewhat recently. And I can't remember if it was put out like for Sonic's anniversary and was just last year, or if it was a year before that, but there's this big, and I've seen it both in hardcover and paperback, I think it's been out for a little while, this big history of Sonic book, and now I really want to get that after reading this article. But basically, the truncated version of this is, it is known as a definite fact, apparently, according to this article, that Michael Jackson played video games and really liked video games and really liked Sonic the Hedgehog especially, which is a thing I had never heard. B, that he had a good relationship with Sega, and of course they made Moonwalker, and that because of that and his love of Sonic 1 and 2, that there's a reason to believe that he might have wanted to get involved with the music of a Sonic game. And but it's not just that peripherally he was into video games and had a relationship with Sega. It's also that it is documented that he actually went to Sega at one point and toured the facility and talked to people there, and he just wanted to go there and meet the people that made Sonic because he loved it so much. He was just a fan, and as the article points out, and I love the way he wrote this, that Michael Jackson was at the time popular enough, but also not controversial enough yet to be let in the door. And unfortunately for him, the big child molesting scandal happened in 1993, just as the game was wrapping up and about to come out. And so there are conflicting reports from people involved with the soundtrack. The big producer, or I guess the guy that was in charge of putting everybody together, I don't know if he was officially the producer or not, but I think he was. He was also Michael Jackson's producer on some of his records, and the one that came out right around that time. And there was a song, and this is the big thing that made people think for a long time that Michael Jackson had to be involved in the game. There's a song called Stranger in Moscow. That exact melody is in the closing credits for Sonic 3. And I never actually played all the way through and beat that game, so I've not actually sat down and listened to that, but people have pointed to, oh, that's exactly the same melody. And you might think, well, that was a popular thing right then, and they just ripped it off. But first of all, I have a hard time thinking that Michael Jackson's people wouldn't have sued them if that were the case, especially Michael Jackson having this parent tie to Sega that I never knew about. Really hard to believe that he wouldn't have sued. More than that, though, apparently, according to people that worked on the soundtrack, that was written before that album came out. So that seems pretty cut and dry to me. But because the scandal happened, it confused everything and made Sega want to cover up Michael Jackson's involvement in the game, apparently. And, well, see, I'm not sure about that part of it, because it seems like Sega wanted to keep it hush-hush and didn't want anybody to know about Michael Jackson's involvement while he was working on the soundtrack, and I would imagine that they just wanted to surprise people that he would be... This kind of thing did not happen. And, you had some bands, some fairly popular bands that worked on games at the time, and, you had some slightly obscure things like Green Jelly doing the soundtrack for Maximum Carnage, and you had more of that kind of thing going on after that, like Offspring doing the soundtrack. Well, the Offspring's music being used in the soundtrack for Crazy Taxi. That was just a few years after that, but of course they didn't write music for it because that was just taken off of Smash, or maybe it was the album after that. I think maybe X-Night of the Ombre. I forget. But anyway, so I'm not sure exactly why Sega didn't want people to know about it yet. Directly after that, when the game came out, they really wouldn't probably have wanted that. I would imagine just because of the scandal and stuff. And you had, Pepsi. He mentions this in the article too. You had Pepsi dropping Michael Jackson's or dropping their endorsement for Michael Jackson and things like that going on. So that makes sense. But also, apparently, Michael Jackson himself didn't want his name on the game. So forget what Sega would have wanted. It wouldn't matter. What Van Luling says that with interviews that he did with again, there were apparently like 6 people that worked on the soundtrack, and again, there are conflicting reports between them. But one of the guys says that Michael Jackson definitely did a lot of the music, and he gives a whole bunch of anecdotes about like nights that they worked on it, and a lot of beatboxing and recording that and turning it into like that's the style of how they wrote it. It was just Michael Jackson beatboxing rhythms and melodies, and then they wrote that down, or excuse me, then they used that and synthesized it for the game. And then there's somebody else that says that Sega just denies that he was involved at all. But then there's somebody else that denies as much involvement as that guy is saying. So yeah, conflicting reports. But it sure seems like he was involved in some capacity, and possibly in a very, very large capacity. But why Michael Jackson didn't want his name on the game, is somewhat up for conjecture. And the interviews made Van Luling think that it was that it might have been a combination of things. One of them seemed to be that he just didn't like what it sounded like, and that and that a lot of what they came up with had to be truncated too much and didn't sound good enough with Sega's sound card. And so he said, if we can't make it sound better, I don't want my name on it. But there, again, I'll let you read the article for yourself. But then there's questions that it might have also had something to do with the scandal and stuff like that. So anyway, it's an absolutely fascinating read and really interesting to consider that might have happened. My big question, and this isn't dealt with at all in this article that I saw. I'm wondering if we're putting Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles together in this, because those games were made together and were released separately, but it's kind of one big game that's sort of meant to be played from start to finish. So I wonder if some of those melodies also made it into Sonic & Knuckles, and that game has some of my favorite Sonic music of all time. I used the Flying Battery music in Comment of the Week. So it got me wondering if Michael Jackson might have had something to do with that track. It's really interesting. But this just talks about Sonic and 3 and says nothing about Sonic and Knuckles. So I don't know if we're intended to just think of those as one game, like Rock Band and some other people rightly corrected me on a couple years ago when I did a gameplay of Sonic 3 and said that I didn't like it as well as Sonic and Knuckles, and people thought it was weird that I was comparing the two games, and I didn't realize they were made together. I always really loved Sonic and Knuckles and rarely went back to Sonic 3, but then discovered that, it's kind of one big game, and that was just a thing I didn't know. So anyway, so that makes me wonder if Michael Jackson had anything to do with that, but now I really want to go play that game again and see if it sounds as Michael Jackson inspired or Michael Jackson made, as people were saying it does, because that's not a thing that I had ever really thought about it, but I always did think that it sounded a little bit different than the other two games. So anyway, read that article if you're at all interested in this, and like I said, it sure sounds like there's a lot going on there, and that it is not the wild conjecture that people thought it was. That's all I wanted to talk about today. I will come back with you with another Captain's Log, I'm sure, sometime in the very near future, as more interesting things happen in the world of geekdom, video games, comics, TV, movies, superhero, whatever, and otherwise. Thanks as always for watching. Sure hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you again very shortly. I'm Captain Logan, and this concludes today's Captain's Log.